I remember something the late Randall Jarrell once said about that. He said, a writer is someone, a poet is someone who spends his whole life standing out in thunderstorms, hoping to be struck by lightning. Once, struck once, authentically struck, he's remembered a half a dozen times, and he's great.
Hello, I'm George Plimpton, and our guest today on Writer's Workshop is a writer who's done many things. He's worked in advertising, he's acted in a movie, he shoots crossbows and is the scourge of snakes with this curious weapon. And despite the fact that he's written a best-selling novel that later became a smash hit movie, Deliverance, he still considers himself as first and always a poet. His view is justified, I think, by his position as a poetry consultant to the Library of Congress, by the National Book Award he won for Buckdancer's Choice, and by a television first, his reading of The Strength of Fields before an audience of millions during the Carter inauguration. His name is James Dickey, and despite his personal success, he isn't going to tell you that any kind of writing is easy. Dickey says, with a little luck and a lot of talent, you might write something that will last longer than you do. But if you don't really love writing, if you don't have the kind of determination that would make you dig ditches or sweep the streets in order to continue, then you're better off doing something else. So that's the love-discipline attitude we'll hear about as James Dickey talks with William Price Fox and the students on Writer's Workshop.
The essence of poetry is concentration of meaning and depth of meaning. In a way, I think that the major influence on prose fiction these days, not only in America but in England, is the major influence on fiction is poetry. The fiction writers that are the most paid attention to are the ones who have learned most from the poets and who try to write like them. I think of people like John Updike, who's very much influenced by poetry. James Agee was the same way, and many another. You either do that, apparently, or you end up in the dustbin with James T. Farrell, you know, who was the sort of the anti-poetical prose fiction writer. He's following Dreiser, and so on. And so, but the main difference is in as far as poetry is concerned, and the distinguishing of that from prose fiction is in the concentration and the depth of the language and the reverberations that the words give off, that they don't need in prose fiction, and is sometimes a hindrance in prose fiction, but are the very guts of poetry. That's one component, and the other one is the deliberate use of some sort of rhythmical factor in poetry, a recurrence of stress in poetry that you don't have in most fiction. And in some prose, such as the prose of the Old Testament, for example, or some of Thomas Wolfe, or some of Melville, and so on, there is something that approaches a regularity of rhythm or accent and so on. But oddly enough, or paradoxically enough, it's ineffectual in prose. It's not effectual, or at least it's not effectual as it would be if it had a linear arrangement, such as a good poet would have given it. In other words, the regularity of rhythm in Melville, in the parts of Moby Dick, say, like in the chapter on the whiteness of the whale, is a sort of a chance thing. It's not really controlled and organized like a good poet would, like somebody like Dylan Thomas would have done it.
Jim, could you discuss what Thomas does? I mean, Dylan Thomas?
What Dylan Thomas does?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the main thing that Dylan Thomas has as a poet is that he is profoundly original-minded. He is original-minded. It's not, there's no fakery about it. Hart Crane is a very original poet, but he arrives at his originality by theory. Thomas arrives at his through the viscera, and because he's actually like that. He sees things in a way that's unique to him. He also has an ear which is as unique as his vision of things is, and when he puts them together, you get that tremendously powerful rolling South Welsh accent, and you get it coupled to a sort of a vision which is a compound of surrealism, a personal brand of surrealism, and what else would you say? Sort of a song-like, ultra-rhythmical sort of a component. If you listen to Dylan Thomas, you can tell immediately what I mean. Let me just abstract a couple of lines from him, from a poem that's not one of his best. Open a pathway through the slow, sad sail. Throw wide to the wind the wings of the wandering boat, that my voyage may begin to the end of my wound. All of this is a curious mixture of surrealism, Freudianism, nautical imagery, stuff about the sea and the wind, and the search, and navigation. All of this comes into a curious amalgam, but with the tremendous and highly individual thrust of Dylan Thomas's language, it seems inevitable. The idea of someone opening a pathway out through a sail, who but him would have thought of that? And yet to him it's just natural to say it that way. It occurred to him, he puts it down that way. His personality is on it, and he goes on. He goes right ahead with it. He doesn't have any doubts, and that's good. That's why you like him so much. There's no doubts about what he's doing. There's no hesitation about it. It seems inevitable.
That's a good description.
Yeah.
Do you feel that he has influenced your poetry?
No, not at all. Anybody that has as inimitable a style as he does, if you are a practicing poet yourself, and if you've got any sense, which I have intermittently, the injunction to yourself as far as your own practice is concerned would be, what does the Bible say? Go thou and do otherwise. But again, I feel exactly the same way about imitation. You can learn without imitating. I mean, you can learn things. One of the things that you learn technically from Dylan Thomas that you want not to do, but which you see if you look at it from the inside, is that what he's doing is to pack a couple of spondes into the middle of the line, the net-webbed wall. Or he'll have 3 hard stresses in the middle of a line. That's inimitable to him. Nobody does that but him. But on the other hand, if you do it, it doesn't sound like him, because your usage is not his and can't be, because you're not him. But somebody who has, I would say, if I were just calling off the top of my mind, who I think are the most original poets in English, who have the most distinctive sound to them, a sound, like you said, would say a jazz or a rock musician has a sound. I would say, if I were to pick the 3 most highly individual, just from that one standpoint, I would say there would be John Donne, would be one of them, and Gerard Manley Hopkins would be one, and Dylan Thomas would be the other. Those would be the 3 that are the most unmistakable. Of those, if I were having an elimination contest, I would eliminate Donne from those 2, and it would leave Hopkins and Thomas, and then I would eliminate Hopkins. And Thomas is the most original and the most unimitatable. If you know as much about prosody, or almost as much as Hopkins did, you can write like Hopkins, but there's not anything you can do that would make you sound like Dylan Thomas, or anything but an imitation of Dylan Thomas. I expect a skillful poet, a very, very skillful poet, somebody like John Berryman, could sit down deliberately to write a Hopkins poem, and to somebody who hadn't read all of Hopkins, would be able to pass it off as an imitation. You could never do it with Thomas. Too many, the source of his value is buried so deep in him, and it's lost forever. The only way we have it now is in his own work. Thank God we have that.
Robert Frost said that most people are too shy to have ideas except through the metaphor. And that makes me think of poetry. But I wonder how important the metaphor is in prose.
Well, again, it depends on the thing, the use that it's being put to, or what the context it occurs in. I think a good metaphor is not out of place anywhere, in prose or verse or newspaper reporting or anywhere else. Metaphors are some of them. I mean, it's such a memorable way of establishing a point. You know, memorable if it's good, and unforgettable if it's great. Some of them are very funny. Some metaphors are very funny. Some comparisons of one thing to another. I know that a French poet named Pierre Reverdy once said, and I've pondered this a lot ever since I first discovered it in the early 50s. Someone, you know how theoretical-minded French people are, writers especially. Someone asked Reverdy, what makes an effective metaphor? I said, well, let me try to bone down and get the gist of what the guy's saying, because if I knew that, I would know a lot about writing that I don't know. What makes an effective metaphor? And he said this, or something close to this. He said, when you compare two things, insofar as the two things that are being compared, the points of similarity of the two things that are being compared are far-fetched, or far apart, but yet just. There you have, that makes for the a strong metaphor.
Mr. Dickey, it seems to me that in writing poetry, the whole process has to do with capturing something in words, yet beyond words. And in going about the writing of it, we feel that ridding the poem of certain things is as important as putting some things in.
Yeah, sure. I may have used this metaphor before in class or somewhere, but someone asked Mozart which kind of music he liked the best, and he is said to have replied, no music. Which, it didn't mean that he didn't like music, commentators have said. It means that he thinks that the expressive part of music is in the rests, and that the notes, the sounds, are only to impregnate the rests, the silences, with meaning. If you listen to Mozart's music, you see how true that is. Dun, 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 dun. I won't go on, but it's never been held against me that I could carry a tune.
You're very well.
Mozart's or anybody else's, but you know enough of his music to know the justice of what he says. That's absolutely true.
Can you comment some more about the form that you use typographically on the page, how you arrived at this, and what this does with your poetry?
You mean this late stuff?
Yes.
Well, I've tried to go for something I call the balanced poem. I I like to give it on the page a sense of precariousness, so that it looks like it's about to topple over if it's not just exactly stressed up, trued up just right. What that adds to it, I don't know, but I like to do it. It's very hard to type up manuscripts that way, but I like doing that, and it's a rather odd thing lately. For some reason, my former publishers want to print up all my work in new formats. So they wanted me to go back and write introductions into why I wrote this way at this period, and why I wrote this other way in this other period. And I wrote my publisher, I said, I'll be damned if I know why I did. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But then I went ahead and invented some mystiques and so on, which now that I read the poems in connection with the mystiques, I said, well, yeah, that is what I meant. That's right, Jim. That's just what you meant.
That's where fiction comes in.
Yeah. I had a British friend once who shall be nameless, who came to this country, and he was real poor. But it was just at the time when the manuscript collecting mania had hit the American colleges, and buying drafts of people's work, poems and so on, had hit the American colleges, especially the University of Texas. So they offered this fellow, as I say, who shall be nameless, some money for his manuscripts and so on, but they especially wanted the drafts. So he told me this in a state of high elation, and then he called me up one night after he'd sold his manuscripts and so on, and the drafts of all these poems to the University of Texas. But he said, you know, I was terrified because I didn't have any drafts of the poems, and that's what they wanted. So I went and concocted a whole bunch of them, and they were a lot harder to write than the poems. All these bogus drafts of these poems that had already been written. But that's one of the ways, I guess, that poets survive.
Longhorn tradition. Yeah. Love that down there.
And I can see all these scholars going through these successive drafts, which he carefully numbered to see where his inspiration had come from, how he used it.
How much do you write?
Well, it'd be hard for me to estimate because I don't have regular hours. That sort of thing is anathema to me. It makes it too much like bookkeeping or something. The way I work is that creation, such as it is in my case, goes on continually, 24 hours a day. I usually have 3 or 4 things I'm working on at once. And I'll be wandering around the house doing something else, and I'll go look at something in the typewriter, and I say, well, okay, but what's wrong with it is this. And then I sit down and fool with it a while and maybe straighten it out some, maybe I can't. But then I'll get up. So this can happen anytime. It can happen during the morning or in the afternoon or late at night or twilight or any other time. But it just goes on, and all the projects sort of cross-fertilize each other in some weird way that's, at least to me, is very exciting.
I heard you say one time that it took you 5 minutes to think of the plot for Deliverance.
It just came to me.
But I've never heard you say how long it took you to write it.
Oh, about 8 years, I guess, but that's misleading. Listen, I scuttle to explain. Because I didn't, when I began to kick around the idea for the novel, it had no high priority on what I was doing. I wrote, I think, 6 or 7 other books during those same 8 years. And the only time the time I began to push to finish Deliverance was when I saw that it was at least theoretically possible to finish it. It actually could exist, you know, that it would be. But I had no idea that anybody would publish it, or I didn't know anything about writing novels. I never did publish even a short story. The only thing I'd ever published was poetry and literary criticism. That's all. It came as a complete surprise to me. My God, Deliverance is not only a movie and a novel, now it's an industry. And the people are always getting killed. The press is always saying that, and they never fail to credit, if that's the word, or discredit me with it. So-and-so, 2 more victims, River claims 2 more victims in Deliverance-type thrill. Right. And I get all these drunken phone calls from people, and so still get them 10 years after, 10, 12 years after. It's not the ones that call me up and tell me they're going to kill me because I caused somebody that's a relative of theirs to be killed. Or they think I did, but it's not the ones that call me up, it's the ones that don't call me up and bother them. But so far, none of them have shown up either.
Would you talk a little bit about Hollywood, what you learned out there or didn't learn or like?
What I learned out there, Billy?
You put on a thimble. You do like it out there.
Oh, in a way, it's fascinating. I mean, it's such a realm of such an enormous enormous range of possibilities and power, and especially money.
Yeah, yeah.
And the people out there, some of them are so dumb. I mean, you think if these people could be earning all this money, what could I, with my vast intelligence, could not be able to do? My God, I could own this town, but after you're out there, well, you don't want to own it. No, because, but it's fascinating, and a lot of very intelligent people will argue with you that this film is the great artistic medium of our time. It's what the theater was to Shakespeare's time. The films are
You believe that?
to our time. I think there are frightening similarities.
You do?
Yes, I do. There's plenty that's corrupt in the Elizabethan theater, too. It's not all immortal masterpieces, not even all of Shakespeare's. But if we have a parallel, it's got to be that. Don't you think so?
I don't know.
How do you feel about it? You talk a little.
I don't like movies. I like an occasional movie. But
I don't like them all that much either, because if you're a writer, your medium is words.
Yeah.
Words, not images up on a screen. They're words.
And they have an indiscriminate use of point of view, which I dislike. Remember the movie Slapshot?
Yeah.
Paul Newman, somebody skating around. You know, in the last scene, he's going to take his clothes off, right? Skating around. So right away I said, how are you going to get those pants off over those skates?
Yeah.
And he skates around, and the way they do it, they cut to his girlfriend sweating him out, then they cut him back and his pants are off.
Wonderful.
I mean, the movies can do that, and we can't.
Well, the trouble with the movies, where the novel, say, that also tells stories, has so much great advantage over the movies, is that it can tell you what somebody's thinking. You can't do that in the movies convincingly. No. If you try to do it, you have to use a voiceover, which is the phoniest of all devices and the biggest cop-out that could possibly be.
I did like La Cage aux Folles, though.
I never did see that.
I thought that was great.
I like movies, and the movies can do some things that you can't do in a novel either. If I were to take an example of my own work, I would say that the only...
That was well done there.
The only thing in Deliverance that I thought, the two things that in Deliverance, the movie, that were comparable to the same passages in the book, I think the visual sense of the river that Vilmos Zsigmond got into film was that dimension of the novel I wouldn't be without. I mean, when that wide screen opens up on that river, you know what James Dickey's talking about. You know, maybe better than you would if you just read about it. That scene was better. That part of it was better in the movie version, and the music was better in this. And that you can hear on the screen in the sound part of the film, which you can't. You got to describe that in the book, and you don't have that dimension in the novel.
What encouragement can you give for one who's trying to write?
Well, to encourage that part of yourself which wants to write and enjoys it and likes to deal with writing on that basis and so on. And it's just I mean, there's something that's added to consciousness when you get some tremendously expressive way of saying a thing. Something is added to consciousness that cannot be changed. Literature is full of examples of this sort. The great writers are the ones that can open up so much of consciousness to people. As D.H. Lawrence said, it can show you how not to be a dead man walking around.
Is there any sort of general advice you could give to aspiring writers?
Yeah. Ask yourself one question: do I really love it? Do I love to write? If there were a lot of circumstances that conspired to keep me from writing, would I still write because I love it? If you can say yes to that, you ought to write no matter what happens to what you write or what happens to you. I remember a German writer I once read, a guy that I admire greatly, a man named Gottfried Benn, said once, if somebody told me that I had to crawl down gutters and sewers the rest of my life in order to be able to write, I would do it. If you have that strong a conviction, or even some variation of that feeling, then that would be the advice. To encourage that in yourself if you have it. If you don't have it, you shouldn't try it, because the frustrations are too great.
Do you think that there is a distinctive Southern school of poetry at this time? Is regionalism possible any longer in
I don't
this
really
country
know.
today?
Those are questions that don't concern me greatly, although I'm interested in hearing other people talk about them. Vanderbilt was a very high on the regionalistic concept of the artist, and with cultural pluralism and local inspirations of various sorts and so on, and I think that's fine. But it's still a bit limiting, I think. Although I'm a Southerner, and a great deal of my sensibility is what would you say, determined by the fact that I'm a Southerner. I don't have any wish to be doctrinaire about it or chauvinistic at all. After all, some of the things that I write about are like fox hunts, for example, are Southern, but a lot of them, like air raids over enemy territory at night, are not Southern. But they're what? Nightmare. The country is nightmare rather than Appalachia. International delusion, bloodshed, horror.
As the years go by, has it become easier or harder for you to write?
Much harder.
Why so?
Much harder because the problems are difficult, more difficult, and what I'm trying for is more difficult.
How do you keep your enthusiasm up then?
All I have to do is pick up a pen.
No writer's block.
No.
Great.
I've read where writers feel a strong sense of power. Do you feel that at all, and can you tell us a bit about
Yes,
that?
I do. I wouldn't write unless I did feel it. As you get older, let's see, I'm 58 now. As you get older, you lose things. You know, you lose people, you lose hair, you lose teeth, you lose life eventually. But to a writer, he's got something that he's battling against the great wall of darkness with, something that other people don't have. I mean, he's got something that will, with very great luck, will stand up and speak for him for many untold years. It might, probably it won't. Probably it'll be forgotten as fast as he is, or faster. But it might not. You can't tell. I remember something the late Randall Jarrell once said about that. He said, a writer is someone, a poet is someone who spends his whole life standing out in thunderstorms, hoping to be struck by lightning. Once, authentically struck, he's remembered a half a dozen times, and he's great.
Jesus.
So we're all out there in the storm. You, me.
This is George Plimpton thanking you for participating in our Writers' Workshop. Please join us again next time.
Mm-hmm.